What you listening to, man?
Oh, you hear that?
I hear that. What kind of song is that?
Yeah, we're gonna have some interesting background here. Okay, I'm gonna get us live on Facebook.
Okay.
All right, so we are live on Facebook. Hi, how's everybody doing? We're gonna give folks a chance just to kind of come on in and join us here, but you are tuned in to Africanity Loves Don't Believe the Hype webinar, and we have an awesome guest for you today, so we're gonna introduce him in just a second, but I'll make sure folks have a chance to get on. Say hello, drop your name down, and let us know where you're from so we can make sure we shout you out. And also be sure to have your questions lined up so we can make sure our guest is able to answer them before we're done. So thank you so much for making time on a Saturday afternoon. Some of you a little further out depending on where you are. See you, Steve. Thanks for joining us. Happy you're able to come on board and be part of this discussion today. Okay, so yeah, we just give folks a chance to connect. Make sure you let us know where you're connecting from, so we can make sure we shout you out. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and get started, and as folks come in, we'll definitely have discussion as we're going along. So as I mentioned, this is Africanity Love, Don't Believe the Hype. We're really excited about doing this webinar series this year, 2018. We actually started it last January, this couple months ago. And the reason we're doing this is to make sure that we highlight all the amazing work that's happening throughout the diaspora. We know there's some really great folks out there moving and shaking, and we want to make sure we have a chance to lift up those stories. And really don't believe the hype. The way that title came about is because we hear so much noise about what Africans or African diaspora is or is not. And some of that, and a lot of that really is negative imagery and messaging. And so we wanted to counteract that, counterbalance that by providing some really great, amazing stories of those in the diaspora that are doing great work when it comes to business, tech, thought leadership, etc. So for today, we have our guest, Anwar Bey-Taylor, who is based here in the Bay Area. He is the creator, the genius entrepreneurial mind behind Mind Traveler Design. So he'll tell us a little bit about that as we go into it. But we want to welcome you, Anwar.
Hello.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us in a sunny Bay Area, Oakland, California.
Hey.
Yeah. So I understand you just came back to the U.S. from your travels. So if you could first tell us a little about Mind Traveler Design and about your travels, that'd be great.
Okay, cool. So Mind Traveler Design is a video game art development studio. I started it in 2014 after working in the industry for, at that point, about 6 years. I'd worked at different studios. I worked at Blizzard Entertainment, EA Games, Activision, Bethesda. And I just really wanted to just have my own space to like grasp creativity in the way that I'd always wanted to create it. And so Mind Traveler Design came to life. It's based in San Francisco, and it's like a boutique art studio. We do work with various companies on various different game projects, and then we also work on internal game projects. One of the cool projects that we're working on right now is called Plasma Worlds. And so that's an action adventure, science fiction, intellectual property we've been developing for virtual reality, as well as like comic book and illustrated book form. And we want to continue to like develop it for all kinds of different mediums, video games, one day TV shows, movies, et cetera, et cetera. We see it as just being an awesome story to be told to the world.
That's awesome. So tell me how you even got into this world of animation and video game design. What led you to this work, to the business that you have now?
Well, I finished high school, and initially I was going into nursing. So my mom, she's a psychiatric technician, and so she was always super passionate about getting us into like the medical field. And since registered nurse was like the step above psychiatric technician, then she was always like focused on like getting us to that next level. And so initially, like, I was going to nursing school and I just didn't like it. While I was going to nursing school, I was also working as a certified nursing assistant. So I worked at like a mental health institution for 6 months. And then I also worked at a convalescent home for 6 months. And I was young. I was only 17, 18, and I just wasn't feeling it. And so I kind of went through like a year of like just not knowing what I wanted to do. I was like super stressed out, depressed, and just not knowing what, my life could be. And then one day, one of my friends that like I always hung out with and played video games with hit me up, and he was like, dude, you should check out this school, like video game development as a career. And then I just remember my world changing in that instant. I was like, wait a second. Yeah, these games don't just come alive on their own. Like there's actually groups and teams of people that, develop these things, and like whole companies and careers that are based off of video game development. And so then I just became like radically like focused. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. Like without a doubt, like I could just see all the visions of like it coming to reality one day, while at the same time not knowing exactly how to go about bringing it to reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going to this art school in Orange County, which was like 30 minutes away from where I lived. I lived in Colton, California, which is in San Bernardino County. And like I moved in with my aunt, and I was like,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
and I was sleeping on her couch and like catching the bus to school every day. It was like a 3 hour. I was just super passionate about like getting that knowledge. And so, yeah, after a couple of years, I left the school and I moved up to going to the school. The loans became like non-conducive to like everything that I was passionate about. And so I left, moved up to San Francisco, and started doing independent studies. So after 2 years of that, finally got my portfolio to a professional quality, and then I started applying to jobs. I mean, I was actually applying to jobs the whole time. I was just getting all rejection letters. And so finally, with my portfolio, like, up to a professional quality, then I got my first job at Blizzard Entertainment. And so like I moved down to Irvine, worked there for a couple years, and then I moved to Baltimore, worked with Bethesda on a couple of projects. And then I moved to back to the Bay Area, back to San Francisco, where I worked with Activision and EA. And so across all those projects, all the styles were different. Like the art directions were different. And I always enjoyed like that variety, like making monsters here, making tanks here, spaceships, characters, different clothing outfits, all kinds of toys, like video game characters, all kinds of stuff. And so I just felt like that versed me to be able to like step out as an entrepreneur and like start a studio that specialized in that ability to create on all kinds of different art directions. And so, yeah, I started Mind Traveler Design. At first, it was super strugglesome. Like for the first 6 months, like I was like super duper broke and like not really stressed out, but just like not sure what was gonna make it pop. And I remember I hit up a friend of mine because I was just like out of money. And so like I hit up a friend of mine for like a 5K loan. And after talking about my expenses and everything, they gave me 2K. And that was just like a huge blessing because literally a week later, a couple of projects that I was working on took off as far as like monthly revenue uh, share. And I was able to support myself. And then after that, I started to pick up more projects and more projects. And then business, just continued to grow. And so throughout all that, even when I was like at Blizzard, like they would always ask me, they'd be like, "Yo, where do you see yourself in 10 years?" And I'd be like, "I see myself exploring Africa, like meeting artists on the continent in various countries, and like learning about different business opportunities." And they used to always look at me like I was crazy. Like, "What are you talking about? Going to Africa? Like that doesn't make any sense." Like,
Yeah, let me just recap. For those who are just joining us, this is Africanity Loves Don't Believe the Hype webinar. Welcome to the webinar. Some of you are joining through Facebook. Welcome. So as we mentioned at the top of this session, we have our guest here, Anwar Bey-Taylor, who is the creator of Mind Traveler Design, which is a San Francisco-based art studio focusing on animation and video game design. He was just giving us pretty much a story, his story of how he went from where he was in the nursing field to now just being this amazing mover and shaker, and even taking his travels abroad to the continent of Africa. And so we're really excited to have Anwar here. We are here at Africanity Love really particularly intentional about highlighting members of the African diaspora that are doing great work and are very intentional about doing work across the diaspora and seeing the brilliance that we have to offer, the strength and the power that we have, especially when we use it collectively. And so, Anwar, thanks for that piece regarding kind of your story to where you were to where you are now. Some of you who are watching may be interested in animation or video game design. Some of you are interested in the creative art space, and Anwar definitely has, that's his realm. And just to kind of recap it as well, we actually came across and found out about Anwar from just our connects and our various network groups in the Bay Area. And more recently, Anwar, this past November, presented at Afrotech, which is a huge tech-based conference that happens every year in the San Francisco Bay Area. Tons of folks in the space of tech, entrepreneurship, engineering, et cetera, come out. And it's a great coming together of many brilliant minds. So Anwar was one of the featured speakers there, and we had a chance to reconnect with him there and ask him to come on and be part of this webinar. So we're grateful for that. So Anwar, can you tell us a little bit about your recent travels to the continent, where you went, and what your intention was in going there?
so my most recent travel was mid-November to mid-January. And the reason why I went was to go and explore. I was in South Africa, Tanzania, Zanzibar. Even though Zanzibar is like a part of Tanzania, it's still so different from like the mainland Tanzania that I understand that like Zanzibar was its own country for like a long time before it joined the Tanzanian government. And then also I was in Ethiopia. And so while I was there, I was connecting with creatives in those spaces. Young folks that are like interested in video game development. And also, I was reconnecting with friends, learning about new business opportunities, and just exploring, seeing new places, new cultures, learning about different worlds.
Wonderful, wonderful. So why Tanzania, Zanzibar, and Ethiopia? I'm not sure. What was your process in selecting those particular countries?
So Tanzania, I have a really good friend who is from Tanzania. And so he was getting married this trip. And so I was already en route to be on the continent. And then, when I found out that his wedding was going to be while I was there, then of course I was there. And so he got married in Dar es Salaam, which is the capital of Tanzania. And then we all went to Zanzibar as a huge group and just continued the wedding party there. And Ethiopia, I went to Ethiopia last year, and I was really, really fell in love with just like the the industrial revolution that's like happening there. and just like how creatives and like developments are coming together, like on the visual and on like the underground front. And so I just really like Ethiopia because based on my, fairly limited travel so far, I've been to 9 countries on the continent so far, and that's not, even half of the countries.
Oh, that's a lot. That's not limited. That's a lot more than some of folks can say. So that's pretty extensive travel.
Yeah. Okay. I try not to speak too generally because, the way that like Africa and like the countries there and the cities there and the regions there are set up, it's like it's just everything's so unique. Like you'll be in like one place, I'll be in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and like the vibe is like business and movement and like, millions of people everywhere, like doing all kinds of like cool stuff, living, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll go to like Gander, and then it's like this small town, like old, like ancient kind of like culture that there's like castles, and then like things are just a lot slower, and so like everyone's like using tuk-tuks to get around, and like everyone's just super chill. And then I go to like the Simeon Mountains where like it's an entirely different vibe. And so I try not to speak too generally because I think that that would just be ridiculous of me to act like as if I knew everything that was happening, even though you go from one place to the other and it's like a completely different vibe. So anyways, yeah, what I really like about Ethiopia, especially Addis Ababa, is like all of that entrepreneurship. I got a bunch of friends that have like left the corporate world, and like they're entrepreneurs out there. They're like Ethiopian born and then like raised in different parts of the world, some in America, and then they like went back to Ethiopia to like, explore entrepreneurship and just be in the country that like they're from. And so that vibe is great. And again, like Ethiopia, based on my travel so far, is really cool because like there's not a lot of like there's not colonization like just kind of wrapped into a lot of pieces of it. Like it's very Ethiopian. It's very like tradition. People are speaking Amharic like everywhere, and yeah, it's just dope.
Nice, nice. So, and then I believe you said something about traveling to South Africa. Is that accurate? You were there
Yeah.
as well?
So South Africa is like the launching pad.
Mhm.
Like I went to South Africa for the first time in 2016 May, and that was my first time going to the continent. And so I visited around, and I really like enjoyed my time there. It was just nice to be for the first time in my life surrounded by millions and millions and millions of Black folks.
Mhm.
So that was super dope. And then South Africa just has so much history as far as just like industrial revolution and like Europeans being there building stuff. And like, so the way it all comes together today is like, it really is kind of like a nice bridge to go from like America to Africa because there's just a lot of like similarities as far as like industry and just like industrialization and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed my first trip there, but then I was also super curious. I was like, okay, so if South Africa is like this, then like what are other countries in Africa like? So then I went back in 2016. That time it was from November until February, and then that's when I visited multiple countries. So I started in South Africa. I went to Zimbabwe, then I went to Mozambique, and then I went to Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, and then back to South Africa, and then back to Zanzibar, and like I was just all over the place because the fact of the matter is that the vibe and the connectivity, like it didn't stop.
Mhm.
For my travels, no matter which country I was in, like it was popping every place that I went. Like, and the further away from South Africa that I got, like the more just traditional things became.
Yeah, yeah.
It was amazing.
And I can imagine there's so much learning and not only of other folks and cultures but also of yourself when you travel. Um, to Africa or just in general travel. But one thing we're really particular about with Africanity Love is ensuring that people go to Africa, visit various countries, really seriously consider business opportunities, investment opportunities, and really building the bridges, especially as Black people in a global space. You know, we're so much more stronger when we're collective in our efforts.
Yeah.
And so what I'm specifically, and those of you who have questions, make sure you drop the questions down in the Facebook Live. We'll make sure we'll answer your questions as well as ask questions through the webinar, through the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get to it before we wrap up. But I'm curious to know, Anwar, about you as, would you consider yourself African American or Black American, or how would you identify yourself?
I mean, I don't even know, right? Because like the thing is that like what's interesting about being African American, which is what I technically am, because you know African American is its own unique kind of like origin story within itself. But one of the things that like has definitely been coming to my awareness is the just like what makes African Americans African American, like as far as like multi-generational African Americans. Like I was hanging out with my family this past weekend, and I like got everyone together. We had dinner in Santa Monica. It was like a great vibe, right? And we were like talking about my grandma, and like pictures were being passed around. And then in addition to that, like a couple of my friends were there, and they were talking about, you know, their family. And like, if you look at what our families look like we don't look like, we look different from like what East and like South Africans look like. And a lot of that comes from just the history of like African people that came to America and that like mixed and like connected with like the native people of like America, and you know, and so on and so on. And so I feel like that is like what makes me African American, is that like my family history in America is so mixed into the fabric of America, from like, you know, my native family members. And, you know, it just changes it evolves our features a bit, skin tones a bit. And it's very unique. And so, yeah, I think that's interesting. And like when it comes to South Africa, like there's a lot of like, parallels with like South Africa and America. So like South Africa, its native folks are like Black African folks. And then like there's European folks there from like Britain and Dutch and everywhere else. And then there's also like the folks that classify themselves as colored. And so the colored folks are like people that came from like India and like all kinds of different countries. And so the way that they all mix together is they kind of create like a new culture of people. And so like, you know, they're called colored people. And so from my perspective, drawing parallels, it's like as if like the African American people are like the colored people in South Africa, because like we came from afar, and then we mixed with the native people of America, and then now you have African Americans, just like, you know, the Indian folks that went to South Africa and then mixed in with the native people, and then now you have colored people. And so it's a very human experience, right? Like, and so that's why I don't really like to classify it so much, because it's not about like, to me, it's not about like just being African American. It's like we're worldly people, like, and that worldliness is very apparent in our, you know, just within the past few generations of like existence. And yeah, it's like we're the future.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I really appreciate that perspective. And you know, and the reason I'd asked kind of how you identify yourself is because, you know, how we see ourselves and even how society sees us, really it shapes our perspective. And you know, so for me, I traveled. You know, I'm very familiar with the context you described in South Africa. I traveled to Cape Town about 6 years ago, so I'm familiar with the landscape and how various groups are categorized and subcategorized, and what society, how they put people in groups and boxes, etc. And the reason I posed that question earlier is to get a sense of when you first go to Africa for the first time, coming with a very Western and American perspective, how do you think that either holds you back or gives you a different advantage as far as how you see things when you interact with people on the ground?
I think for me, like, just based on like my life experiences, I've learned over the years to be very open to things. Like not coming in with preconceived thought processes, not coming in no matter how many stories I've heard or how much I've read or how much I've seen previous to like being in that experience, like not bringing any of that. Just listening, being open, being overwhelmed with joy from like accomplishing, just being in that space and then just like taking it all in. And so for me, it's very easy to like travel around Africa and like be in Africa because I'm not bringing anything that ultimately is just wrong. Like if I did come with a lot of preconceived perspectives and like I avoided doing this or I avoided saying that or I tried, acting like this certain way, then ultimately what I would just prove myself is to be incorrect because everything is to be experienced. The conversations are to be had, the places are to be seen, and there's no way of understanding what those things are until like you're in the space. And so, yeah, like being in Africa is such an amazing experience. It's just so easy for me. It's so easy to get around, and it's so easy to just talk to people and like figure things out. And like it's not always like super smooth and stuff like that, but it's not supposed to be. I'm not in America anymore. Like I'm not, I'm not in a place that has been like building in the same way as like the place that I came from. Like I'm in a place that's been building completely differently. Like I'm in a place that's been around not just the past 2, 3, 400 years like America has, but that's been around for like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So like, yeah, I don't have any expectations when I go. I just be happy to be there and just learn and hear about what's going on. And then on the reverse side, like the folks that I meet are just happy that I'm there and that we can talk about like the things that I've experienced in like America or like through in business or like, the things that bring me there. Because essentially when you break it down to like a foundational perspective, like I'm a Black man that has traveled over 20,000 miles to a whole nother continent, one that doesn't, that a lot of people don't necessarily like travel to as far as like, just the numbers go.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that I'm there, like people are just like, they're just down. They're just like, what? Like, and you're a super chill guy. You're cool. Like, all right, let's do stuff. Let me show you this. Let me show you that. Let me connect you with this person here. And then you meet those people, and then they're like, what? Let me connect you with these people over here. And then next thing you know, you just connected with hella people, and like,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
So why do you think most people do not kind of take on the path where you said, you took advantage of an opportunity to travel to Africa, and then you met some people who then led you to other contacts where you built more relationships? Why do you think more people don't venture out to go to Africa to travel, number one? And why do you think people don't particularly look at business opportunities in Africa?
All right. So my answer is just based on just like limited perspective. And so like I just want to like precursor that with like my answer is based on limited perspective. They're not facts, they're just opinions. And anything is possible. And so some of the reasons why I feel like people don't travel to Africa is because it's far. And so like, you know, and so okay, so there's a couple of things. So it costs, but I mean, it costs to travel anywhere. Like it costs to travel to Australia, but people stay going to Australia. Africa is far. And so if you're working in a corporate setting, which a lot of people are, then like, you know, you only have 3 weeks vacation a year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 4 or 5 if you take in like holidays and like that break in between like Christmas and New Year's Eve, if you have that privilege. And so it takes like 2 days to get there. It takes like 2 days to get back. That's 4 days gone already.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that you have to take into consideration. Another thing is uh, when they do get there, they'll travel like with like a travel company. I mean, I think Travel Noir is like a good company to like go and travel to the continent with because you know it's like super curated for like the African diaspora, and then you like connect with African folks, and like it's just super dope in that way. But if you travel like with like a European tour company or like something that isn't, you know, super connected to the people, then like you won't really get to connect with the people. You know, you'll just be staying in hotels, going on adventures every day, and you'll kind of miss out on that like local, like on the ground connectivity. So yeah, I think it's just the distance, and also it's the way that like Africa has been presented to us, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as people that are not in Africa. Like I know Black Panther just came out, and people feel like they have like this new connection to the continent. Um, but outside of Black Panther, which is still like a fictitious, you know, world based
Mm-hmm.
on a comic book that's owned by Disney, like outside of that, like there's not a lot of imagery or like stories or like just sources of information that tap into like the minds of like the African diaspora, like African Americans in particular. Like you don't, you know, it's very rare that you'll hop on Google or that you'll pick up a book from the library and it just talks about how like if you go to this continent, you'll be connected in ways that you've never imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Like that you'll be surrounded by millions and millions and millions of people that look like you or that like connect with you like as if you are a part of the culture, and that through that you'll experience a kind of privilege that you never knew was possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know in America there's a lot of talk about like white privilege,
Mm-hmm.
and the funny thing about it is that like I never really believed in that thought process. I felt like it was too empowering to people that were not black or to people that were not white. It was too empowering, and it was too disempowering to like everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So it was too empowering to white people and too disempowering to people that were not white. Just the idea of white privilege. Like if you say white privilege, you're basically saying that because you're white, you get to do and see and have a type of life experience that is like that no one can unless they're white. Like this is too much.
Mm-hmm.
It's too
Yeah.
ridiculous. And so then I went to Africa, and for the first time in my life, I was just connected to people, just just off like just raw like humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going places and seeing things, and like there was just no obstacles, no boundaries, no walls, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to understand. I was like, oh shit, like this is black privilege. Like this is
Yeah.
what black privilege is like. And so now I kind of get it a little bit more. Like it's not even so much about like privilege, it's just about like cultural connectivity. Like if
Mm-hmm.
I see another black person anywhere in the world, like the way that our brain chemistry like can come together is like super fast, like super understanding, and like in a way that is just like shoulders like relaxed, and like people are just like really enjoying themselves. And so I get that like in America, like white folks do that, but black people can do that too. So yeah, cultural privilege.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And sorry, I'm kind of like multitasking here, but I think what you're doing is great. Any advice you have for those who want to travel?
Yeah, do it. Make it a priority. Like, you know, be unreasonable about it. Like take a risk because it's very expensive, and it's very like economy, and it doesn't for like just your place in the world. It helps you like connect and just feel like you have a home.
So how did you get started? Because you said in the beginning you started off going to South Africa, etc. But those who are very new, who've never been to the continent of Africa, who are interested in doing so, or those who are interested in even business, right? Business opportunities. How can they start? What are some advices you have for those who want to start but don't know where or how to start?
So for me, I started with Travel Noir. You know, my friend Zim, she's founder of Travel Noir, and she's like a really good friend. And so when she launched Travel Noir Experiences, she was like, she was like, yo, you gotta come. And I was like, yeah, of course, I got you. And so initially, I wanted to go to Brazil, but then she was like, no, you gotta come to South Africa. And I was like, are you sure? And she was like, yeah. And then I went, and it was amazing. And so that's how I went. But I always wanted to go. So eventually I would have gone anyway. And so I say that to say that like Travel Noir is a good way to get started. I have a group of friends that just recently went to Africa. They were in Tanzania, they were in Egypt, Morocco, and I think they were also in Kenya. And they just got in a group of friends. It was like 10 of them, and then they just went for it. And they had an immaculate experience. And so traveling to Africa should be just like traveling anywhere. You just go because you know it's dope, and you know that like it's going to give you everything that you've always wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't think it should be such a big difference. Like,
yeah. Well, I think part of it, and I think to your point, you said you had a friend who has a business getting folks to the continent and other places. So you had to connect, kind of a nudge, right? And so with Africanity Love, so one of the first events we did last year was actually called, it was actually based around a film screening around a documentary called Bound, Africans versus African Americans, which really kind of deconstructed and took on the various layers of the tension between the various groups. And in the documentary, which is really interesting, the central symbolic theme throughout the whole documentary was a TV set and the power of media and messages. And so what we found, which was very interesting in our discussion as well, is that we as people of the African diaspora, as Black people around the world, we sometimes instead of finding out about each other through direct contact, we find out about each other through the media, stereotypes, perceptions that are limited. And so that is what we base our information on as to whether we're going to, travel to Africa or get to know another group or whatever the case may be, right? And to your point, this limited understanding that we have about each other, it really limits the possibility of what we could do together. And so I know for me personally, my family's from Eritrea, Northeast Africa. So I have that experience growing up. I've traveled to the continent a couple of different times, but a lot of my exposure came early on from living in a very traditional African household, but living in America. So having kind of the balance of the various cultural perspectives. And some folks are not as fortunate to have a balanced exposure. And so what happens is we get sidetracked and bamboozled by this perception that's primarily negative about the other, right? And so it limits the opportunity to be exposed to other cultures. And that's one thing with African Love, we're very clear, is that we need to first break down these myths, these stereotypes, and these very limited perceptions we have about each other, and find ways, for instance, this webinar and other platforms, to share about the great work, for example, that you're doing, that others are doing, and really have a clear way of engaging with one another. And your travels, I'm sure, have opened up your mind and allowed you to see and experience so many things that then you have this perspective that you can share with others who may not have as much exposure.
Yeah.
Right. And so that, in a sense, you kind of by default become this ambassador and folks look to you as in, oh, well, tell me what it's like to be in Africa, or tell me what it's like to go to South Africa or Ethiopia or wherever else you've been, and what is it really like? Not just based on what the movies say and the TV, the programs, but tell me the real deal. And that's very important. And I think that those of us who have traveled, who have seen, have a duty to share our experiences with others as a way to be kind of this gateway to introduce new ideas, right? New concepts, new opportunities. And what I find really exciting about what you're doing with Mind Traveler Design and your other work, Plasma TV, is you're pretty much, through the work you're doing, it sounds like you're building these bridges as well. Could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the travels are very inspiring because it's mind-blowing to see whole new worlds where there's millions and millions and millions of people that are living, that are existing, that are smiling, that are having families, that are growing, that are expanding. In addition to that, it's really awesome to know that there is like a base of like a huge base of people that like would really enjoy like work created by people that are like them, that can tell stories and like really, you know, identify with like some of the things that they've experienced in life. And so the way that that like influences the way that I create is, you know, telling stories with more confidence that like people will get it, and that it's not like some foreign or like small thing, that it's a huge thing. And also work ethic has evolved. um, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone has the same 24 hours. And seeing the way that people, not just in Africa, but all over the world, use the 24 hours is pretty awesome. And so, yeah, it just inspires me to like, you know, talk to people from that perspective. Like big challenges have become very small, and like kind of like the worries and the gripes of like the Western world have become very, you know, small. And you know, we don't realize as a culture, like how much uh, we have, and how many things that we can do, and how much resources we can tap into negate of our color in class. Like there is a lot of amazing stuff happening here, and it's not that there's amazing stuff happening there, but America is definitely in a leadership position where like countries all over the world like look to us and expect like us to be utilizing the resources that we have, the programs, the applicability to technology, just the business, like just hearing the way that things are going and being on the ground. Like I have a lot of like successful friends on the continent that are doing amazing work, that have made all kinds of awesome things. And but they're still super excited to hear about like what's happening in America. Like, all right, what you doing out there? Oh, okay, that's how it's going. All right, okay, I see. Even though they're just as successful or more successful than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so just having that perspective and that realization is crazy. Like it's like, yo, we're here. Like we be out here fighting for like equality and like applicability to opportunity, and we don't even realize that like it's here. Like
Mm-hmm.
all we got to do is just try. Is just
Yeah.
be in action about our dreams and our passions, and then it's all there. Like there's really nothing there stopping us from like killing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before we wrap up, I want to make sure folks have a chance to ask questions or any comments they would like to make. So we have Steve from Frankfurt. Hey, Steve. Janet from New Jersey. Hey, Janet. And Janet also says that she's in the nursing field and she's trying to launch into something different. Okay, let us know if you have any questions, Janet, here. Monique, we see you on here. You're very welcome. And Monique's in Cali. Okay, great. So yeah, if you have any questions, just make sure you throw it down before we wrap up. And yeah, and then so just a few more, one more final thought I had, and I want to share, Anwar, is I know we kind of talked about before this idea of I mean maybe it really maybe I don't know if we did touch on it actually, but sounds like you are in the kind of creative design space. As you travel and doing the work that you do you find inspiration that then supports your business as far as creativity? And if so, can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, you know, with Plasma Worlds, which is the intellectual property that I'm creating, like it's about this Ethiopian space captain that gets lost on this alien planet. And so it's like a survival story of him like doing everything humanly possible to like stay alive to create the possibility of getting back to his wife and daughter. And so, you know, when I'm traveling, I'm seeing new worlds. I'm seeing like new geography, new mountain formations. I'm seeing, you know, new ways in which like the ocean is connected to land and like islands and just like, you know, there's like when it comes to like the ocean, like there's islands, little mini islands in the ocean that like are only present like at certain hours of the day. But when, you know, when they are present, like their whole spaces of land that like all kinds of things can happen on. And so, you know, stuff like that like comes through in the story writing that I do, and it comes through like in all kinds of different ways of creativity. In addition to that, like I mentioned earlier, like I know that there is millions and millions, billions of people that like if they had this story, like they would enjoy it. They would read it and they'd take something from it. Like it makes me kind of feel like have you ever read The Alchemist?
Yes, I love that. It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, it makes me feel like The Alchemist on two levels. Like one level, you know, the character in the book is just in action about an idea that he has in his mind. And so, you know, he's walking the treckless path, which is like the highest like spiritual way of being that like a human being can accomplish. Is just like letting go of like the notion of like knowing everything and just being open to the world and like believing that like if you're in action and you're trying your hardest, then you will get to your goal one way or another. So, you know, traveling on the continent makes me think about that. But then also, like at some point, you know, that author, Coelho, like had to have come to the conclusion that like this story, like could be loved by millions of people around the world. And that like if he doesn't create it, then they'll never have it, they'll never know it existed. And so he had to believe in his story so tremendously that he wrote it just with the hope that like if he finished it, then it would become a book, and then that book could be sold in stores all over the world. But that book never would have been made. We never would have read it if he stopped writing it, or
Mhm.
if he didn't believe that like he could just go through the process of creating it. And so, yeah, that's it's just key. We just gotta go in and just
Yeah,
do
I
it.
think that's so awesome, and that's beautifully said. This notion of that, well, we have to give as far as our gifts, our talents, those things that come natural to us. We, in a sense, have a duty to offer it to the world, right? Because we could be solving someone's need, we could be providing some sort of solution, and when we don't allow ourselves to really tap into our full potential, we're doing a disservice, right? Because your creative talents, your ideas, your thoughts, whatever it may be, it's what the world needs. And so it's not just something you should do, it's something that you need to do. No one else can do it but you, the way that you do it. And I think that is really very great, and I love that perspective you're bringing. The Alchemist is great, a book, classic that I definitely recommend, as well, to the power to really following your journey and understanding your assignment, and where that comes from. So key. So we're pretty much wrapping up towards the end here. I wanted to offer a space for you to provide some final thoughts and some closing remarks.
Okay. So final thoughts. Thank you for having me. We've been connecting for quite a while now, and it's really cool to see that connection grow and flourish. And I'm sure that like over time, it's going to continue to grow and flourish in all kinds of different ways. So this is just the beginning. Uh,
Wonderful. And where can we find you if we want to know more about what you're working on, your projects? How can we follow up with you, Anwar?
yeah. So my website is mindtravelerdesign.com. So that's like my business site. You can find like, the creations and like the projects that I've worked on. I'm also working on a new site. It's going to be called anwarbey.com. And so that's going to talk about like my travels, my professional work, as well as like my design work and stuff like that. You can also find me on Instagram at Anwar Bey, and of course at Facebook on as Anwar Bey-Taylor.
Great, great. And it looks like we have folks from all over here. We have Lewayan from France who says he likes what we're doing, very inspiring. Thank you. We have Tiffany from Cali. Hey, Tiffany says, I love what you guys are saying. Very progressive watching from Cali. So we have folks from all over the globe. I think this is just another reminder that we are part of the global economy, the global market. And, when we collectively move, we're so much more of a force and a power. And so, thank you all for being here. We'll definitely take some more questions offline. We'll follow up with you through Facebook Live. Please stay tuned to what we have coming up with Africanity Love. So you can check us out on africanitylove.com, as well as our Facebook page. We also have a YouTube channel where we'll be posting a lot of these videos and other commentary as well. So and we also, by the way, we have Samuel Narty from the Big Apple. Hey, Sam. So we have folks from all over coming in. We're super excited about our community. And thank you everyone for being on. Thank you, Anwar, for spending this Saturday afternoon with us. And we'll definitely keep the conversation going offline. So take care.
All right, peace.
All right, peace.